Hi. As we celebrate Dr. King's life and legacy today, I wanted to just take a moment to talk a little bit about Dr. King's inspiration and motivation and the ways that his life and legacy have influenced me, my life, and the way that I operate my business. And I first want to talk about Dr. King's legacy. At the time of his untimely passing, Time Magazine, I'll never forget this, it sticks out of my mind. Time Magazine released a survey that they had done, just asking people, how do you feel about Dr. King? What are your thoughts? Do you like him? Do you not like him? Is he a good guy? All of those things. And at the time of Dr. King's passing, most people did not like Dr. King because, he was talking about equality. He was talking about all the things that, especially during that time, most folks just weren't on board with. And so the results reflected that. And it was like 10, 15, 20 years later, Time Magazine did this same survey asking people, what are your thoughts on Dr. King? Do you like him? Do you not like him? Is he a great guy? And at that second time, Dr. King was rated highly favorable. I mean, most people who completed that survey love Dr. King, and even today, I'm sure if Time Magazine were to do that same survey, pretty much everyone would be like, yes, Dr. King is my favorite. I love Dr. King. He inspires me in so many different ways. It can probably, recite some part of the I Have a Dream speech or some philosophy that Dr. King shared. And I think about that, how over the years since Dr. King's passing, his legacy has grown to what it is today, where we have a federal holiday, and there's so many different events and celebrations and things happening. There's pretty much every city has a street or a highway named after Dr. King. I think about the King Center in Atlanta and all of these different institutions that are in Dr. King's name. And I think about his legacy and attribute all that we know of Dr. King and the things that we remember of him to Coretta Scott King. And I think that she is really glossed over a lot when we talk about Dr. King, especially today. And I have made an effort over the past couple of years in my business, as I recognize this day and share Dr. King's work and how it continues to show up today, to ensure that I also remember Coretta Scott King, because how else could Dr. King's legacy be so strong and convince so many people this many years later of Dr. King and what he stood for and what he spoke of? And I in no way think of Coretta Scott King as just the legacy carrier of Dr. King. I mean, Coretta Scott King was an activist in her own right, and had so many wonderful accomplishments even before meeting Dr. King that were amplified, in them coming together. And I can't help but think about Dr. King's legacy and the fact that this day even exists for us to recognize and celebrate him, and that was because Coretta Scott King was so persistent and so consistent in making sure that Dr. King was remembered and that the work that he did was not forgotten. And I just want to ensure that as we think of MLK Day today, that we remember his legacy, and that it's because of Coretta that we remember Dr. King in the way that we do. And so I think of that when I think of today. The other thing that I think of is Dr. King's life and his work. Oftentimes when people think of Dr. King, they think of him as a mediator of race relations. They think of his I Have a Dream speech, where he says, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I mean, you all know that. I think most people remember Dr. King in that way. And I do too. I think of, all the things that Dr. King has said as it relates to race and, the betterment of the Black race as a whole. But I also think of Dr. King and his message later in life about economic justice, specifically the Poor People's Campaign. And I don't know how many people actually know about the Poor People's Campaign, because it's definitely not talked about as much as, the I Have a Dream speech and all of those other things. But the Poor People's Campaign really was an effort to bring people from all different backgrounds together, all different races together, specifically thinking about poverty and how that impacts people from all over in so many different ways. And so I'm not sure if you all knew, but Stanford University has what's called the Martin Luther King Jr. Research and Education Institute. And I encourage you to go to their website. They have so many different resources related to Dr. King and all the things that he spoke about and spoke on over his life, including transcripts and videos and all kinds of stuff. But in talking about the Poor People's Campaign at Stanford University, this institute has captured this. Martin Luther King announced the Poor People's Campaign at a staff retreat at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and that's the SCLC, in November 1967. King planned for an initial group of 2,000 poor people to descend on Washington, D.C., southern states, and northern cities to meet with government officials to demand jobs, unemployment insurance, a fair minimum wage, and education for poor adults and children, designed to improve their self-image and self-esteem. So when I think about that, when I hear all of those pieces put together, it was also reported that many leaders of American Indian, Puerto Rican, Mexican American, and poor white communities pledged themselves to the Poor People's Campaign. So when I think about all of those things, all of these people coming together, thinking about how we can get jobs, unemployment insurance, a fair minimum wage, and education for all of these different groups, I can't help but think about intersectionality. It's just the first place that my mind goes. And it's probably because of the work that I do on a regular basis, but also because that's what it is. It just makes sense. And so that's the other thing that I think about when I think about Dr. King and his influence on the work that I do. I think about it from an intersectional perspective. And I facilitate 2 trainings specifically around intersectionality. The first training is like Intersectionality 101. What is it? Talking about Kimberly Crenshaw, talking about, Sojourner Truth and the history of intersectionality and what it means today. It really is a 101 awareness building sort of training. And then I have like a 201, which is one step above that, which really looks at and talks about intersectionality for leaders, decision makers, and influencers, those who are in a position to actually facilitate change when it comes to the systems of how we work and in our communities and in our organizations. And in that 201 training, it really is a mindset shift, because traditionally when we are approaching issues through a DEI lens, we look at a particular group and we say, okay, this group is not doing as well as its peer group. It's not thriving. So what can we do for this particular group to help them achieve success at a greater level? But when we look at it through an intersectional lens, there's so many different intersections that it's hard to do that. It's hard to take that same approach and apply it into so many groups and subgroups and on and on and on. So we have to kind of flip it on its head and say, here's the issue. The issue is, with the Poor People's Campaign, the issue is poverty. And this is how poverty impacts each of these groups and each of these subgroups. And some of these groups may be affected disproportionately, but all of these groups are impacted in some way, shape, or form. So let's address how all of us can come together to really impact and change the system when it comes to poverty, so that everyone that's impacted, whether they're named or they're unnamed, whether they're known or they're unknown, can benefit from this particular systemic change. And when I think about that, when I teach that in the Intersectionality 201 course, That's the thought process that I have in mind. And it's so interesting because also on Stanford University's, this institute's website, it says some in SCLC thought King's campaign was too ambitious, the demands too amorphous. And although King praised the simplicity of the campaign's goals, saying it's as pure as a man needing an income to support his family, he knew that the campaign was inherently different from others SCLC had attempted. Let's find something that is so possible, so achievable, so pure, so simple, that even backlash can't do much to deny it. And yet something so non-token and so basic to life that even the Black nationalists can't disagree with it that much. And I think about that. I think about that phrase and that thought so much, because as I'm doing this work and thinking about it through an intersectionality lens, it seems so easy, yet, you know, it's so complicated, because it's like, if it hasn't been done, and it's something that has so many different layers to it. But at the end of the day, it's like, that's the only way that it's going to work. And so I so appreciate this shift in Dr. King's thought process, which became so much more apparent through this Poor People's Campaign, that it truly is inclusive, especially from an intersectional perspective, that it shows up in the work that I do on a regular basis. It shows up all the time. And I think that, you know, this shift, while it is inherently different from how we may, you know, facilitate a lot of the DEI work that we see that's glamorized out there, but, you know, this lens, thinking about the issue first and then really breaking down how it impacts people, so many different people, through this lens of intersectionality, it really gets to the root of why these gaps exist in the first place. And so it resonates with me so much, so often, but especially on days like today when we're remembering Dr. King's life, and we're remembering Dr. King's legacy. So, you know, I guess my takeaway for you as you're thinking about Dr. King today, and you're thinking about all the amazing things that he did in his life and the legacy, that you, one, please remember Coretta Scott King, and remember the amazing work that she put into really making sure that the rest of the world remembers Dr. King, and remembers him in a much positive light, even though, you know, during the time he was alive, it wasn't as favorable as it is today. But also remember that the Poor People's Campaign, and the way that that campaign was structured in a way to bring more people into the conversation, so that we all can find our place in doing this work and not be relegated to the sidelines, but actually be in it side by side doing this work, so that more people can thrive and more people can do more than just live paycheck to paycheck or survive. And so, you know, that's what Dr. King's life and legacy really means to me, and I hope that it shines through in the work